It was supposed to be a routine afternoon, but things took a sharp turn when Officer James pulled over a sleek luxury car he didn't think belonged to its driver. Behind the wheel was 17-year-old Maya, a bright and confident black girl on her way home. The officer, firm in his belief that she couldn't possibly own such a vehicle, accused her of stealing it. Maya, stunned but composed, calmly tried to explain the situation, but Officer James wouldn't listen. He demanded proof, treating her with cold suspicion instead of fairness. What the officer didn't know was that Maya's father wasn't just any man, he was a highly respected FBI captain. As tensions rose and assumptions clouded judgment, the encounter spiraled into a moment neither of them would forget. How would the truth unfold? And what lessons would be learned when power meets prejudice? Stay tuned to find out. As Maya sat in the driver's seat, her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She could feel the weight of the officer's gaze and the judgment in his tone. "Whose car is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp and skeptical. Maya took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's my dad's car," she said, pulling out her license and registration. But instead of looking at the documents, the officer's doubt only seemed to deepen. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, shaking his head. What Maya couldn't understand was why her explanation wasn't enough. She wasn't speeding, the car wasn't reported stolen, so why was she being treated like a criminal? Meanwhile, a small crowd began to gather nearby, their curious eyes adding to the tension. Unbeknownst to the officer, Maya's father, Captain David, was already on his way. And when he arrived, this situation would take an unexpected turn. As Maya waited, her heart raced. The officer had called for backup, escalating a situation that shouldn't have been a problem to begin with. He circled the car, looking for any sign to justify his suspicions. Maya glanced at her phone on the passenger seat. She had already texted her dad, and he replied instantly, telling her to stay calm and that he was on his way. But staying calm wasn't easy. The stares from onlookers, the officer's unrelenting tone, it all made her feel small, even though she knew she'd done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, Officer James felt justified in his actions. To him, something didn't sit right. A teenager in an expensive car, dressed casually, it didn't match the picture in his mind. But deep down, there was a nagging feeling, one he chose to ignore, that maybe he was jumping to conclusions. Just as Maya thought things couldn't get worse, another patrol car pulled up. The tension in the air was thick, and the crowd murmured among themselves. The officer asked her to step out of the car. She hesitated, unsure of what would happen next, as the sound of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. Her dad had arrived, and he wasn't alone. Maya turned her head as a black SUV rolled to a stop nearby. The door opened, and out stepped her father, Captain David. He was dressed sharply, his FBI badge clipped to his belt, his commanding presence immediately drawing attention. The crowd, now larger, fell into a hushed silence as David's sharp eyes scanned the scene, quickly piecing together what was happening. His jaw tightened, and with purposeful strides, he approached the officer. Officer James, unaware of who David was, held up a hand to stop him. "Sir, I'll need you to step back. This is an active investigation." David didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his badge, holding it up for the officer to see. "I'm Captain David Carter, FBI. And this is my daughter," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority. The officer blinked, momentarily taken aback. His gaze shifted between David and Maya, as if trying to reconcile his earlier assumptions with the truth now staring him in the face. The silence stretched, thick with tension, as David crossed his arms and asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Why is my daughter being treated like a suspect?" The officer hesitated, fumbling for words, but before he could answer, David's phone rang. It was one of his colleagues from the bureau, and David's expression darkened as he listened. Something wasn't adding up, not just with the situation at hand, but with Officer James himself. And now, the stakes had risen even higher. David ended the call, his face unreadable, but Maya could see the tension in his clenched jaw. He stepped closer to the officer, his calm exterior beginning to crack. "We need to talk," he said firmly, gesturing for the officer to step aside. James hesitated but reluctantly followed, sensing this wasn't someone to argue with. The crowd leaned in, straining to catch any words, while Maya stood by the car, unsure of what was happening but grateful her dad was there. Away from the crowd, David didn't hold back. "That call I just got, it was from the FBI. They ran your badge number, Officer James. You've got a file. Complaints of racial profiling and unnecessary escalation. Care to explain that?" The officer's face went pale, his earlier confidence replaced with unease. I was just doing my job," he stammered, but David wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Maya noticed something strange. One of the backup officers seemed nervous, constantly glancing at the car as if searching for something. Her instincts told her this wasn't just about her being pulled over, it felt bigger. And as David pressed James for answers, Maya's mind raced. What if this wasn't just about her dad's car? What if someone had set them up? The tension thickened as the pieces started to fall into place, but the full picture was still out of reach. Something much deeper was happening, and it was about to come to light. David's eyes narrowed as Officer James stumbled over his words, clearly rattled. "Your job?" David repeated sharply. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass innocent people based on assumptions." But before the conversation could escalate further, Maya called out. "Dad, something's wrong," she said, pointing toward the other officer, who was now pacing nervously near the car. David turned, his instincts kicking in. He approached the second officer, whose unease was impossible to ignore. "Is there something you'd like to share?" David asked, his voice low and steady. The officer froze, his hand hovering near his radio, but before he could respond, a muffled sound came from the trunk of the car. Maya's eyes widened in confusion. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. David motioned for her to stay back, his FBI training taking over. "Open the trunk," he ordered, looking directly at the second officer. The man hesitated, his face pale, but under David's unrelenting gaze, he finally moved to unlock it. When the trunk popped open, the entire scene shifted. Inside was a stash of counterfeit money, neatly bundled and stacked. Maya gasped. "That's not ours," she cried, her voice breaking. David's mind raced, piecing it all together. This wasn't about Maya or even the car. Someone had planted evidence, and it was clear who. "You were planning to pin this on my daughter," David said coldly, turning back to Officer James and the nervous officer. James tried to protest, but David cut him off. "Save it. You're both going to have a lot of explaining to do." As the crowd watched in stunned silence, David called for backup, this time from the FBI. The twist was clear. The officers had been involved in illegal activity, and Maya had unknowingly driven into their trap. But now the truth was out, and David wasn't about to let them get away with it. The scene quickly shifted as FBI agents arrived, taking over the investigation. Officer James and his accomplice were placed in handcuffs, their plan exposed for everyone to see. David stood by Maya, his arm around her shoulder, reassuring her that everything would be okay. The crowd, once tense with uncertainty, began to disperse, murmuring about this shocking turn of events. Maya looked up at her father, still shaken but grateful. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said softly. David smiled, his voice calm. "You did everything right, Maya. This wasn't your fault." As the agents loaded the counterfeit money into evidence bags, David spoke with the lead investigator, ensuring that the officer's actions would be fully accounted for. For Maya, it was a moment of clarity, a harsh reminder of the world's unfairness, but also a testament to the importance of standing up for the truth. Driving home, Maya felt a renewed sense of strength. Her father had always told her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it mattered. Today, she saw that firsthand. This was more than just about her. It was a fight for justice. And as they drove away from the chaos, she knew this moment would stay with her forever.